Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist? Episode 14, The Bahamas. So we go back to the Caribbean and away from the mountainous countries that seem to dominate the A countries. This is our first B country, so get hyped. The Commonwealth of the Bahamas is located in the Caribbean. Well, not really, but they're so close they pretty much count. The Bahamas make up most of the islands in the Lucayan archipelago, that is found right at the border between the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. The remaining islands in the Lucayan archipelago are made up of the British territory of the Turks and Caicos Islands, which is to the east of the Bahamas. Other neighboring countries are Haiti and Cuba south of it, along with the United States to the west. The 700-ish islands that make up the country are all fairly tropical and largely flat. The Bahamas has around 386,000 people living in the country, with over half the population located on the island of New Providence, where the capital Nassau is located. Most people in the country are black, with over 90% being of African descent. Most are descendants of slaves brought to the islands in the 18th century, or recent immigrants from Haiti. There is also a small white population on the island, with a little under 5% being white, with mostly English, Scottish, or Greek heritage. There is also a small mixed population of around 2%. Language-wise, most people speak English, although like many Caribbean countries, the English spoken in the Bahamas has a distinct accent and slang to it, with it having similarities to other countries around it, along with the Gola dialect in South Carolina. Among Haitian migrants, French is commonly spoken. Religion-wise, most people in the country are Christian, with Protestantism being the largest branch of Christianity at over 80%. Baptists, Anglicans, and Pentecostals are among the largest Protestant groups present in the country. Besides Protestants, there is also a large Catholic community, with a little over 14% of the country being Catholic. Other religious groups include Greek Orthodox Christians, Muslims, Baha'i, and several different African-inspired shamanist religions. Around 3% of the country is irreligious. The first people to arrive in the Bahamas are believed to be the Lucayan people, where the archipelago gets its name from. Now, we don't really know a lot about these people. They didn't really write anything down, and as you'll soon find out why, a lot of them died off very quickly. We do know they were closely related to other Taino people in the Caribbean, and likely arrived on the islands around the first millennium, which means around 1000 CE. The Lucayan would actually be the first people to be encountered by the Europeans during the Age of Exploration. Columbus is believed to have landed on San Salvador Island on October 12, 1492. The encounter is believed to have been mostly peaceful, with the trading of goods apparently taking place, and Columbus declaring the land for Spain. The next few decades would prove disastrous for the Lucayans living on the island. While the Spanish didn't really build up a colony in the Bahamas, they did on the island of Hispaniola south of the Bahamas, and forced much of the native population in Hispaniola to backbreaking work looking for gold or on plantations. Very quickly, the native population on Hispaniola died out due to harsh conditions, along with smallpox outbreaks, of which the natives had no defense. The Spanish decided that since the Lucayans were right next to them, why not just use them as slave labor? Well, the Spanish weren't very good at keeping their slaves alive, and after less than 20 years of using the Lucayan people as slaves, the Bahamas became depopulated, with apparently no one living on the islands from 1520 until the late 1640s. The Bahamas would see the next set of people entering the islands in the late 1640s by a group of English settlers. These English settlers had come from the British colony of Bermuda, and were dissatisfied with the Church of England. During this time, England was experiencing a civil war between those that really liked the king and liked the way the Church of England was being run, and those that didn't like the king, didn't like the way the church was being run, and also apparently didn't like Christmas because it seemed too Catholic-y. Anyways, those that settled in the Bahamas were Puritans, like the Thanksgiving kind, who didn't like the king and wanted to establish a colony where they felt they could worship as they pleased. They landed on the island of Eleuthera, and became known as the Eleutheran Adventurers. However, this would not be a fun adventure, as remember they hate Christmas. But they also struggled with infighting, and often were unable to get supplies to the island on account of storms and rough seas. Many would leave to return to Bermuda, or go to the Puritan colony in Massachusetts. However, as the years went by, other settlers would move into the region, settling on either Eleuthera or going to other islands. They would set up the beginnings of a British colony. This colony, however, would struggle due to Spanish attacks, as the Spanish never actually gave up the claims to the islands. The Spanish would sack Nassau in 1684 and would actually drive the English governor out in 1703. Now, one important thing to know about Caribbean geopolitics at this time is that pirates roamed the high seas. Now, these pirates weren't entirely outlaws. Many pirates would fit into the technical term of privateers, which means they could legally raid ships and steal gold on the high seas, but they would only attack ships or ports of a hostile nation. So let's say I decide to become a privateer for England, with all my listeners of the podcast joining me on as crew. I would raid Spanish and French ships, but I would leave English ships alone. Any money or goods I had taken would either be given to me and my swashbuckling crew, or would be given to the English crown. Now, if you were captured by a rival power, they would probably treat you like a criminal and promptly kill you. Now you may be asking yourself, why is he talking about pirates? What does this have to do with the Bahamas? And don't I need to tell all my friends about how good of a podcast Why Do Countries Exist is? Well, to answer the last question, you should. But for the first two, you should know that the Bahamas during this time was filled with pirates, with many using the islands as a base to raid Spanish vessels. When the Spanish drove the English governor off the island in 1703, the islands were left with no real authority to rule over them. In place of traditional authority, the pirates who lived on the islands decided to form a proto-state, known as the Pirate Republic. These pirates set up a kind of pirate code to run the islands, and establish some kind of order. Several famous pirates would live at the Republic, at least for a time, such as Stede Bonnet, Calico Jack, Annie Bonny, Mary Read, and the most famous pirate of them all, Blackbeard. Now how much of an actual state the Republic was is disputed, with the pirates likely holding little actual authority, but it would become a safe haven for pirates during the golden age of piracy. In 1718, the British decided to retake the Bahamas and return crown rule to the islands. They at first did not really mind the Pirate Republic, as the Bahamas wasn't really a rich colony for them, and they mostly attacked Spanish ships, so who cared? Well, by the mid-1710s, the British noticed that since the war with Spain was over, many of the pirates decided to start raiding British ships, along with Spanish ships. So they retook the colony, offering amnesty to pirates who ended their swashbuckling ways, and hanged those who didn't. The colony would be attacked by the Spanish in 1720. It would be attacked again in 1776 by, surprisingly, the 13 colonies who were in revolt. The raid on Nassau in 1776 would actually be the first action fought by the American Navy and Marines, resulting in the Marines taking much of the city's munitions before moving on. Nassau would be attacked for one last time in 1782 by a combined French and Spanish fleet who managed to occupy the city for a year before they were driven off. The American Revolutionary War would end with the Bahamas under British control, and with the Spanish finally recognizing British authority in the islands. The American Revolutionary War would importantly bring a new set of migrants to the colony. Those in the 13 colonies who had decided to side with Britain, known as Loyalists, found themselves facing political persecution back in America, and many chose to migrate to the Bahamas. Among those Loyalists, many were slave owners. Now before 1783, there was a black population on the islands, but most people were white. After 1783, the white population became a minority, with at least 70% of the population being black, with the majority of those being slaves. Now in a strange way, the Bahamas became almost a haven for slaves in America. Now this wasn't because slaves in the Bahamas were treated any better than slaves in America. Slaves were still treated like property, often worked to death, and forced to endure tough working conditions. The reasons many American slaves wanted to go to the Bahamas was mainly because in 1807, the English outlawed the slave trade in their empire. Now this didn't outlaw slavery, but it means that if you were a slave outside the British Empire and you entered British territory, you were no longer a slave. The Bahamas' close proximity to Florida made it an ideal spot for Floridian slaves to try to escape slavery. While it certainly would be difficult to make the journey from the coast to one of the Bahamian islands, it was possible, and many slaves were assisted by abolitionists and freed slaves in the Bahamas. Some famous examples of slave escapes include one mass exodus in 1823, when 300 escaped slaves and Seminoles escaped to the Bahamas aboard several Bahamian vessels. Several different slave ships that were intended to be sent to America were wrecked in the Bahamas, thus freeing all slaves on board. In 1841, the slave ship, the Creole, was sailing to New Orleans when the slaves aboard the ship revolted. The slaves then ordered one of the crew members to take them to the Bahamas. When the ship arrived, all the slaves on board were freed. This incident created diplomatic tension between the British and America, and has been considered one of the most successful slave revolts in history. That year, in 1841, all slaves in the British Empire were freed, ending slavery in the Bahamas. However, despite all slaves being given freedom, life on the Bahamas for many Africans would remain difficult. They often had little skills to get a new job, so most stuck to continue to work either as house servants, sharecroppers, or in the fishing industry for low wages. Continued discrimination against the black population prevented social mobility, and most influential on high-paying jobs in the islands were occupied by the white population. In the early 1860s, the Bahamas became a famous destination for Confederate blockade runners, hoping to escape the Union Navy in the American Civil War. The islands had, since the days of pirates settling on the island, a reputation for being a place where, if you wanted, you could conduct some more unsavory business. Many Confederate ships would use the Bahamas as a place to stop and refuel, or to avoid Union ships. Skipping forward, the Bahamas would continue to be a place where contraband was transported into America. During Prohibition, Bootleggers would buy alcohol in the Bahamas before illegally transporting it into the States. In the 80s, Colombian drug cartels would use the Bahamas as a place to refuel their planes before dropping off cocaine in the United States. A small island in the Bahamas was actually bought by Pablo Escobar's cartel, and from 1978 to 1982, the island was a party island for the cartel, with sex and drugs being an everyday occurrence on the small island. Even today, the Bahamas is used by criminal organizations to bring drugs into the United States and other countries. The colony of the Bahamas continued on into the 20th century, with the Bahamas continuing to provide agricultural and fishing products to the British Empire, but still remaining fairly poor. It would see almost 2,000 Bahamian men participate in the British Army in World War I. In 1940, the ex-King of England would become the governor of the Bahamas. Edward IX would lose the English crown after he married a twice-divorced American woman, causing controversy in the UK and forcing him to abdicate in 1936. Edward would also controversially visit Nazi Germany and was accused of being a Nazi sympathizer, and to keep him away from England, he was given the role of governor in the Bahamas. Edward would hate being governor, but he did help build up infrastructure on the islands and try to improve economic conditions there. He would retire at the end of the war in 1945 and move to France. One of the most important developments Edward would do would be to build an airport in Nassau that would become the main airport in the country. This airport would make it easier to travel to the Bahamas, which increased tourism from both the UK and America. Today, over 50% of the GDP comes from tourism, and the tourism sector employs about 50% of the country. Another important source of income that comes into the country is foreign money. Within the country, there is no income taxes, no corporate taxes, or really any progressive taxes in the country. This makes the country a great place for those with a lot of money, such as billionaires or corporations, to store their money. Around 15% of the GDP comes from people storing money in offshore accounts, which are then invested by banks in the country into the economy. The Bahamas apparently is the country with the most offshore bank accounts in the world. The Bahamas' role as both a tax haven and a tourism spot has resulted in the country increasing its economic growth, and its economy and standards of living have been increasing year on year. The Caribbean, after World War II and witnessing much of Africa become independent, began demanding greater change. The Bahamas would be given a limited amount of autonomy in 1964, with two main political parties emerging in the colony. The first was the United Bahamian Party, or UBP. They were in favor of keeping ties with Britain, free market economics, and representing the white minority on the islands. They were led by Ronald Simonet, and dominated early Bahamian politics via a combination of corruption, vote buying, and even apparently buying an opposition candidate to stop running against the UBP. Opposing the UPB was the Progressive Liberal Party, or PLP. It represented a more left-wing interest in the country, hoping to build up a welfare state on the islands, and represented the large African majority, which had little economic or political power during this time. While, at first, they could be considered fairly left-wing, today they have moderated towards the center, and could be considered broadly social liberal. They were headed by Lyndon Pindling. The PLP managed to just barely win the 1967 general election in the colony, and was the first time the Bahamas was run by a black government. Pindling, now Prime Minister, would lead the Bahamas to declare independence in 1973, while still remaining in the British Commonwealth and having the Queen as head of state. The PLP would build the beginnings of a social welfare state, give more political and economic power to blacks on the island, and join several international and regional organizations, such as the UN, the World Bank, and CARICOM. However, while they promised to get rid of corruption in the Bahamas, corruption was still an ever-present force. And even today, most major politicians in the Bahamas have, at one point or another, been accused of various levels of political corruption. Now, when the Bahamas was declaring independence, there was one part of the country that strongly opposed this decision. The Abaco Islands, compared to the rest of the Bahamas, was very white, and still is very white, and they didn't want to join this new left-wing run Bahamian state. In the 70s, an independence movement formed, advocating for an independent Abaco Island. This was surprisingly backed by libertarians, and in particular a group known as the Phoenix Foundation, which funded the independence movement there. Now, the Phoenix Foundation has a fairly controversial history, with it several times attempting to create a libertarian microstate in several different parts of the world. At a couple of points, it was alleged several libertarian activists and or paramilitary groups urged their followers to overthrow the local government on the islands, which, by the way, is something that the Phoenix Foundation would pay someone to do later on, although this would happen in Vanuatu and not the Abaco Islands. The separatist movement there became fairly unpopular and by the late 70s had pretty much died off. In 1992, Pindling and the PLP would lose control of the country after losing that year's general election to the Free National Movement, or FNM. The FNM was formed from a combination of UBB supporters and ex-PLP members in the 70s, and had been the main opposition party in the country throughout the Pinling reign. The FNM represents more conservative interests on the islands, promising to crack down on crime and reducing taxes in the country. The FNM government would rule for 10 years before being unseated by the PLP in 2002. In 2007, the FNM would again return to power before, again, being unseated in 2012 by, you guessed it, the PLP. In 2017, the FNM again took control of the country, with Herbert Menzies becoming the 4th Prime Minister of the Bahamas. Menzies has worked to continue to build up the country's healthcare, infrastructure, and tourism sectors. He has, however, like many Bahamian politicians, been accused of corruption. And actually just a couple days ago, the finance minister and deputy prime minister in his cabinet resigned due to an alleged scandal. The country, like many in the Commonwealth, has a governor general, who acts as the Queen's representative in the country. The current governor general is Cornelius A. Smith, a former FNM parliamentarian, and served as the Bahamian ambassador to the United States in 2007. In terms of problems the country faces, one of the biggest is simply natural disasters. The entire Caribbean region, on an almost yearly basis, has to deal with large hurricanes that hit its shores, destroying infrastructure and ecosystems, disrupting daily life, and resulting in death. The effects of climate change have made this problem worse, as it is believed that with rising sea temperatures, hurricanes will increase in intensity. The deadliest hurricane on record occurred in 2019 with Hurricane Dorian. Dorian devastated much of the eastern and northern islands, leaving 74 dead, 70,000 homeless, and costing the Bahamas more than $3 billion in damages. Other problems in the country include general political apathy, poverty, which, while it has been decreasing, is still prevalent in the country, and the effects of COVID and its large reduction of tourism into the country. At the start of the episode, I did mention that a large number of Haitian migrants are in the country. Most of these migrants have come to the Bahamas looking for a better life, as, while there are problems in the Bahamas, it generally has a higher standard of living compared to the rest of the Caribbean. Haitian migrants make up more than 20% of the population and have created social tension. Anti-immigrant groups argue that these migrants overwhelm the social security system in the country and drive down wages, while pro-immigrant groups argue that they help the development of the country by working low-paying jobs and that many of these Haitian migrants have lived in the country most of their life. So why does the Bahamas exist? The Bahamas have always had two sides of its history. On one side is a country who has been used as a smuggling point for contraband, or a place where illegal or unsavory business activities can go down. On the other side is a beautiful tourism location, where the people work hard despite the rough conditions, and work to build a country moving forward, upward, onward, and together. Up next, we have another island country, this time far west from the Bahamas in Bahrain. Prepare for British colonialism, again, religious tension, and a country where the majority of the population aren't even from there. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. So I've talked about the podcast network I'm in, with Anthology of Heroes and Founders of Nations. This little motley crew of history podcasts had another person join. They are called Vexed, and they're run by two people actually. And they talk about kind of the history and the significant meaning behind different countries' flags. They recently did an episode on the Argentinian flag, along with doing an episode on the state flag of Mississippi that was recently changed. I'll put a link to that episode in the description. I'll also put a link to Founders of Nations' recent videos on the founder of Argentina, San Martin, and Anthologies of Heroes' latest video on Saint Gregory the Illuminator of Armenia. I would encourage you to go listen to all those podcasts. They're all very good. They all put a lot of time into them. I would appreciate it. For my next video, of course, I'm going to be doing Bahrain as the next country, but I'm kind of debating if I want to do another side episode in between the Bahamas and Bahrain. I think I might talk about European political parties, or kind of learning about the Abaco Islands independence movement. I found that there was like a whole history of libertarian microstates being formed, and like the Phoenix Foundation is involved with like half of them, and it's like such a weird history, so I might do just like a episode on libertarian microstates. Thank you for watching. My email is whydocountriesexist@gmail.com for if you want to send your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. The sources I used for this video are Bahamaology's article, American Armed Robber Buys Bahamian Passport, Baha Reads video, How History Helped Shape Modern-Day Bahamian Culture, BBC News article, Bahamian Outlook Clouds for Haitians, Black Pass article, The Creole Case of 1841, Got Marian Guru's page on the history of the Abaco Islands in the northern Bahamas. CNN's article, The Bahamian Death Toll is Rising as 70,000 residents left homeless by Hurricane Dorian seek food and shelter. Emperor Tiger Star's video, The Republic of Pirates. Geography's Now's video, The Bahamas. It's History's video, The Golden Age of Piracy. Jamaican Observer's article, Bahamian's finance minister and deputy PM resign with immediate effect. Mr. History's video, A Super Quick History of the Bahamas. Raphael Munning's series of videos, Bahamas The Journey to Majority Rule. The Star Sailor League's video, Slaves in the Bahamas. Travel Film Archives video, Nassau in the 50s. The West Indies Committee's video, The Caribbean Great War. Wikipedia, and the ZNZ's Network's video, New Prime Minister Elected.